Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this session today. So, I'm Miles to go from Certification Station, and in real world, I am Parul Khanna. I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and I have the experience of working in finance, IT, and insurance sector over the past 6 years. I pursued my master's in information systems security management from a Canadian university. I specialize in risk assessments, TLP, as well as incidents response. Few people might also agree that I specialize in resume or the career-related advices as well. So, coming to the topic, the topic today is centered on discussing the fundamental cloud computing concepts, characteristics, and services. We'll talk about the common threats, security considerations, and the different cloud service models. We'll focus on how the data security is achieved and how the data privacy is acquired in the cloud environment. I'll also discuss how risk is managed in the cloud environment and the different steps for managing the risk. And the last, I will leave the session open to answer any follow-up questions from the audience. So yes, please feel free to post your questions in the stage chit chat channel. So, cloud computing. What is cloud computing? That's a very commonly used and extensively used term these days. It's the delivering of the computing services over the internet, which is otherwise known as the cloud. And then these services include your servers, storage, databases, networking, analytics, etc. Now, a combination of all these services, they help the organization acquire faster innovation, flexible resources, as well as economies of scale. So, to put it another way, cloud computing, it's a way to rent the computer power and storage from someone else's data center. You can treat the cloud resources like you would have the resources in your own data center. And when you are done using them, you give them back. Services you use, and that helps you lower your operating costs, render infrastructure more efficiently, and scale as your business needs change. So that's really an amazing and wonderful concept with the cloud computing. Now, talking about why do we need to move to the cloud? So there's essentially cost savings, which we just discussed. It's using a pay-as-you-go pricing model. You just pay for the services you use. There's on-demand availability, which means that the computing resources are made available to the users as needed. You don't have to ask for assistance from the IT department to complete the process. It's more like a self-service thing. So you simply reach out to your provider and they will process your request. It avoids the unnecessary delays and provides the flexibility for pay-per-use self-service. It's easily accessed through a broad network. Now, this means that you can use the multiple and varied types of devices, such as your laptops, mobile phones, and tablets, in getting the resources you need. Resource pooling, that's an interesting concept with the cloud computing. It gives multiple users the capability to share the resources, but without exposing them to the security risks. So, in other words, the privacy is retained. So, let me take a stab at it and simplify it. So, imagine that you have a building housing hundreds of individuals. Now, though they live in one infrastructure, they are still able to keep their privacy because they live in the separate flats. The tenants of the building share the same amenities provided by the same infrastructure, and this is essentially what resource pooling is all about. And necessary in cloud computing in order to keep up with the demand. So if an application exhibits large volumes of traffic, service will not be affected because additional servers will automatically be provisioned or provided. Elasticity simply means that the cloud can immediately provision or release according to what's needed without any hassle or any delays. Measured service. So as such, the cloud, it has got a meter that measures, monitors, controls, manages, and reports on the resource usage. Now, what's the benefit of this? This encourages transparency and is a guarantee that the users only pay for what they actually use. In other words, the amount users pay, it varies according to how much they consume of the services being delivered. So let's take a step into the real world and see the application of the advantages we just discussed. Now we all know that there is a spike in sales during the Black Fridays, Boxing Days, and the holiday events. The sheer volume of customers and the transactions, it greatly exceeds all the normal operations throughout the rest of the year. And when this happens, retailers who offer online shopping, they can see great benefit from hosting their sales capabilities in the cloud. The cloud provider can provision resources necessary to meet this increased demand and will charge for this increased usage at a negotiated rate. So that's again a very beautiful concept associated with the cloud computing. It makes sure that the resources are put to optimum use when the demand surges. Looking at some other benefits of moving to the cloud, again, the benefits that we are discussing in this session, it's not an exhaustive list because it depends on your organization needs, your business requirements, and then depending on the culture of the organization, the benefits can vary. So, flexibility. Cloud offers vast storage space, multitude of solutions, and plenty of customizable options. So this helps improve not only the employee efficiency, but also the customer satisfaction. In addition, using the cloud also gives the employees more freedom to work according to their preferred time, as the cloud can be accessed anytime and anywhere, as long as they can connect to the internet. Now, in COVID-19 crisis, we have definitely seen an accelerated growth in the adoption of the cloud computing. The increased volume of employees working from home using conferencing and collaboration services, the increased traffic on the networks that connects the user to these services, cloud computing, it has got it all covered, and it is inherently designed to handle the fluctuating demand. Reliability. That essentially means if your one server is down, you'll still be able to access your data as another server will take its place. And this means that all your resources will be kept safe at any time. Good investment. Yes, definitely, it's a very good investment because you pay as you use the pricing model. It's very transparent and very fair, and you just pay for the services that you use. You won't have to spend on the physical equipment, utilities, maintenance, and other pertinent expenses. Your operating costs will be significantly minimized. And when your business resources are on the cloud, there's no need for the additional IT personnel and extra on-site servers and the computers. So you are guaranteed to get back your investment without having to worry about the additional expenditures. Environmental advantage. So with everything going digital these days, you don't need a lot of hardware or the physical products, and your businesses will help reduce environmental waste as well. This will likewise help decrease the production of paper waste too. Increased collaboration and improved efficiency. So cloud computing makes collaboration a simple process. Team members can view and share the information easily and securely across a cloud-based platform. And then some cloud-based services even provide collaborative social spaces to connect the employees across your organization, therefore increasing interest and engagement. Now, it's important to understand the basic models offered by the cloud to the customer depending on the business needs, because once you actually step into an organization and if you are doing a risk assessment, you have to know that which service model your organization is leveraging so that you can assess the security considerations related to that model. I'll briefly describe the three service models offered by the cloud environment. They are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So infrastructure as a service, in this model, the cloud provider, they simply supply the underlying infrastructure, and then the clients are responsible for managing aspects such as your applications, runtime, middleware, and data. The client does not manage or control the underlying cloud infrastructure, but has control over the operating systems, storage, as well as the deployed applications. And what's the advantage of this? Well, there is optimum use of IT resources in the systems, and definitely there is reduced cost of ownership. There's no need to buy the assets for the everyday use, and there's definitely reduced cost for the maintenance as well as the support as well. Platform as a service, the consumer does not manage or control the underlying cloud infrastructure, and that includes your network, servers, operating systems, or storage, but has control over the deployed applications and possibly configuration settings for the application hosting environments. Just excuse. Sorry, yeah. So platform as a service is useful for developers that they can build upon and use to create customized applications. So all your servers, storage, and networking can be managed by the cloud service provider, while the developers can maintain the management of the applications. And this platform is delivered via the web, giving without having to worry about the operating systems, software updates, etc. So advantages of platform as a service. Well, there's multiple hosting environments and flexibility. There is support for the multiple programming languages and frameworks, and thus enabling the developers to code in whichever language they prefer or whatever the design requirements specify. It's simple, cost-effective, and then there is deployment of applications. It's scalable, highly available, and developers can customize the applications without the headache of maintaining the software. Software as a service. Software as a service, it represents the most commonly utilized option for businesses in the cloud market. It moves the infrastructure, your platform, and all support for the application and its data to a third-party hosting provider. So this eliminates the need for IT staff to manage the network, infrastructure, hardware, and the software, your backups, your security, etc. And instead, all these tasks, they're handled by the hosting provider. So software as a service, the user simply accesses the application via the web, typically requiring only the use of a standard browser. Looking at some of the advantages of software as a service, there is the associated capital expenditure is removed and replaced by, yes, a pay-per-use licensing model. There is reduced support costs. Customers, they save money on the support issues because the relevant cloud service provider handles it for them. There is automatic updates as well as the patch management. And the user is always running the latest version and the most up-to-date deployment of the software release as well as any relevant security updates. There's no manual patching that's needed. Standardization and compatibility, all users have the same version of the software release. Okay. Now, let's dive a bit deeper into the security considerations associated with these cloud service models. So there is, again, the security considerations that we are discussing over here. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. So I have picked the most typical ones that are pertinent to all these three models. Virtual machine attacks, or the VM attacks. Now, cloud service contains hundreds and thousands of virtual machines, and once a virtual machine is compromised, then VMs on the same physical server, they can attack each other because they share the same hardware and the software resources, including memory, device drivers, storage, and hypervisor software. Now, hypervisor attacks. So let me take a step back and explain what an hypervisor is. A hypervisor, also known as a virtual machine monitor, it's a software that creates and runs your virtual machines. It allows one host computer to support the multiple guest VMs by virtually sharing its resources such as your memory as well as the processing. Now, because virtual machines can run off one physical server with a hypervisor reduces the space, energy, as well as the maintenance requirements. So, coming to the hypervisor attacks, malicious hackers consider the hypervisor a potential target because of the greater control afforded by the lower layers in the system. Compromising the hypervisor enables the control over the installed virtual machines, the physical systems, as well as the hosted applications. User access management. Now, this is one of the critical concepts associated with while you leverage the cloud services. Access management, it helps to protect the availability, integrity, and confidentiality of these assets and resources, and ensuring that only those authorized to use or access are permitted. So, key components associated with an access management, it includes administration, authentication, as well as authorization. Administration, it's the ability to perform onboarding or changing the account access on the systems and the applications. Authentications, yes, it's confirming your own identity using the username and password. Authorization, it's granting access to the system based on policies, rules, and the attributes. So it's where the pure principle of least privilege as well as the need to know comes into effect. Protection against malware, backdoors, and Trojans. Now, a backdoor refers to any method by which an unauthorized user is able to get around the normal security measures and gain high-level user access or the root access on a computer system, network, or a software application. Now, in the past, we have seen the case studies where attackers have utilized embedded and hard-coded malware as a method of obtaining unauthorized access and retaining this access for a prolonged and extended period. Most notably, the malware has been placed in point-of-sale devices, handheld card processing devices, thereby divulging large amounts of sensitive data, including your credit card numbers, customer details, etc. Code reviews and other software development lifecycle checks, they're essential to ensure that the likelihood of malware, backdoors, trojans, and other potentially harmful vectors is reduced significantly while leveraging your cloud services. Data access and policies. This is again a subset of the user access management, which we just discussed. It's important to have the correct implementation and repeated assessments of the security policies for accessing the data. Now, one of the challenges associated with this is to map your organization's security policies, processes, and standards to meet and match the policies that your cloud service provider enforces. And we will dive a bit deeper into this in the next coming topics. Web application security. This is the security vulnerabilities within the web applications that carry the significant risk and potential impact for the enterprise. Now, cloud services rely on a robust, hardened, and regularly assessed web application to deliver the services to its users. Hence, it's important to ensure the security of your web applications. At this point, I'm going to digress a bit and mention the OWASP Top 10. So the OWASP, which stands for the Open Web Application Security Project, it's a regularly updated report outlining the security concerns for the web application security. So if you are using the cloud services to host an application, it's important that you take into consideration the risks, the vulnerabilities outlined by the OWASP Top 10. So briefly going through the top 10, which is injection. Like injection flaws such as your SQL, it occurs when the untrusted data is sent to an interpreter as part of a command or query. There is broken authentication and session management, which allows the attackers to compromise the password keys or the session tokens or to exploit the other implementation flaws. There is sensitive data exposure. Now, many web applications and APIs that do not properly protect the sensitive data, such as your financial, healthcare, etc. So, attackers may steal or modify such unprotected data to commit credit card fraud, identity theft, or the other crimes. XML external entities, or the XXE, they can be used to disclose the internal files using the URL handler, internal file shares, internal port scanning, remote code execution, and denial of service attacks. Broken access control. Restrictions on what authenticated users are allowed to do are often not properly enforced. So attackers can exploit these flaws to access unauthorized functionality and data, such as access other users' account, view the sensitive files, modify other users' data, change access rights, etc. Security misconfiguration. So that's one of the most commonly seen issue, and this is a result of your insecure default configurations, incomplete ad hoc configurations, the misconfigured HTTP headers, and the error messages that might contain sensitive information. Cross-site scripting, that allows the attackers to execute scripts in the victim's browser, which can hijack user sessions, deface the websites, or redirect the user to malicious sites. Insecure deserialization, that leads to remote code executions, which can be used to perform the attacks, including free play attacks, injection attacks, and privilege escalation attacks. using components with known vulnerabilities. So if a vulnerable component is exploited, such an attack can facilitate serious data loss or the takeover. Insufficient logging and monitoring. That, coupled with ineffective integration with the incident response, allows the attackers to further attack the systems, maintain persistence, and pivot to more systems and tamper, extract, or destroy the data. So it's important to have logging and monitoring mechanisms in place. Next, looking at some of the deployment models which are offered by the cloud services. Now, again, this section, it's heavily influenced by your organization's risk appetite, cost compliance, and regulatory requirements, as well as your legal obligations, along with the internal business decisions and the strategy. Broadly, it can be classified into 4 types: your public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, as well as the community cloud. Public cloud, that's open for use by the general public. It may be owned, managed, and operated by a business, academic, or government organization, or some combination of them. It exists on the premises of the cloud provider. It's an easy and inexpensive setup because the provider covers your hardware, applications, and bandwidth costs. Private cloud, the cloud infrastructure is provisioned for exclusive use by a single organization comprising multiple consumers, example, the business units. It may be owned, managed, and operated by the organization, a third party, or some combination of them, and it may exist on or off premises. So a private cloud is typically available only to the entity or the organization, its employees, contractors, and for selected third parties. Now, private clouds are typically more popular among large, complex organizations with the legacy systems and heavily customized environments. In recent emerging trends, hybrid cloud has taken over, which is a composition of 2 or more distinct cloud infrastructures, such as your private, community, or the public cloud. It enables the organizations to retain the control of their IT environment, coupled with the convenience of allowing the organizations to public cloud service to fulfill non-mission critical workloads, and then taking advantage of flexibility, scalability, and cost savings. Now, community clouds, they are a recent variant of the hybrid clouds that are built to serve the specific needs of the different business communities. In community clouds, the cloud infrastructure is provisioned for exclusive use by a specific community of consumers from the organizations that have shared concerns. Example, your security requirements, compliance considerations, mission, policies, etc. It may be owned, managed, and operated by one or more of the organizations in the community, a third party, or some combination of them, and it may exist on or off the premises. So, next we will talk about the most significant cybersecurity threats for the cloud networks that the businesses face when migrating the data or the applications to the cloud. Again, take note that these cloud security threats, they're always evolving, and the ones that we'll be talking about, they are by no means exhaustive. Data breaches and data loss. So let me distinguish between these 2 terms. Data loss refers to the loss of information, deletion, overwriting, corruption, or integrity related to the information stored, processed, or transmitted within the cloud environments. Data breach, that's the exposure of personally identifiable information, such as your name, date of birth, or social insurance to unauthorized or malicious entity that could result in significant harm. Data breaches require mandatory breach reporting to the relevant agencies, entities, or bodies. And then significant fines may be imposed on the organizations that cannot illustrate sufficient duty of care or security controls being implemented to prevent such data breaches. Now, DLP has been an ever-increasing trend with the organization. I have worked previously with a Canadian bank and can't stress the importance of having a TLP program which protects the organization's proprietary information and PII information. There is a plethora of TLP solutions available, and it's a very challenging and interesting field to be in. Account or service hijacking. So this is not a cloud-specific threat. It arises due to phishing. So it allows for the attackers to monitor and eavesdrop on the communication capture the relevant credentials, and then access and alter the account and user profile characteristics. Insecure interfaces and APIs. Now, what's an API? An API basically allows the applications or components of the applications to communicate with each other over the internet or a private network. For users to access the cloud computing assets and the resources, they utilize the APIs made available by the cloud service providers. Now, there may be a case where the developers has not developed the API securely, and as a result, these interfaces are completely open to the internet. Anyone can use them to access the enterprise systems as well as the data. So think of it as if you're walking around a neighborhood trying the doors until you find one left that's unlocked. And then this can result in credentials being passed to the third parties or consumed insecurely across the API and relevant stack components. DOS attacks or the denial of service attacks. It prevents the users from accessing the services and resources from a specified system or location. And then this can be done using any number of attack vectors available, but they typically look to target the buffers, memory, network, bandwidth, or processor power. So now, when you're leveraging the cloud services, availability is one of the main concerns because everything is stored in the cloud. So you should make sure that there is no single point of failure that can expose an entire system to failure if there is a successful launch of a DOS attack. Malicious insider. So people, processes, and technology. They are the three components or the key assets of any organization. People tend to present the single largest challenge to security due to the possibility of a disgruntled, rogue, or simply careless employee or contractor exposing sensitive data either by accident or on purpose. Abuse of cloud services. Attackers are increasingly using legitimate cloud services to support their activities. For example, they might use a cloud service to host disguised malware on sites like GitHub, launch DOS attacks, distribute the phishing email, mine the digital currency, execute automated click fraud, or carry out a brute force attack to steal the credentials. So cloud service providers should have mitigations in place to prevent and detect abuse or misuse of the cloud services. It's also important for the cloud providers to have an incident response framework in order to respond appropriately. Shared technology vulnerabilities. Now, cloud service providers, they share the infrastructure, platforms, and applications among tenants and potentially with the other providers. So wherever possible, the providers should implement a layered approach as well as defense in depth to securing the various components. Now, talking about the data residing in the cloud, there is pertinent threats to it. So unauthorized access and usage. Now, unauthorized usage in the cloud, data storage can be manipulated into unauthorized usage, such as by account hijacking or uploading illegal content. Unauthorized access, that can happen due to hacking, improper permissions in a multi-tenant environment. Liability due to regulatory non-compliance, specific controls such as encryptions, which we will look a little bit later, that might be required to ensure compliance with certain regulations. Theft or accidental loss of media. This threat applies to portable storage, but as the cloud data center grows and the storage devices become smaller, there are increasingly more vectors for them to experience theft or similar threats. Improper treatment or sanitization after end of use. Now that is challenging in cloud computing because we cannot enforce physical destruction of the media. Data leakage and breaches, we discussed this briefly. So consumers should always be aware that the cloud data is exposed to data breaches. It can be external or coming from an internal employee with storage access. Now, data tends to be replicated and moved in the cloud, which increases the likelihood of a leak. Corruption, modification, and destruction of data, and then yes, this can be caused by various sources, such as human error, hardware, or software failure, even such as fire flood or intentional hacks. It can also affect a certain portion of the storage or the entire array. Again, to emphasize that this is the threats that we just talked about. This wasn't exhaustive. There's others such as your software attacks or the malware attacks that pose a pertinent threat to your data that's residing in the cloud. Now, having talked about the threats, it's also important to ensure that we have relevant data security technologies in the cloud to protect the data. So DLP, which is data loss prevention, it describes the controls put in place by an organization to ensure that certain types of data, such as your PII, confidential, or internal use only, they remain under organization controls in line with the policies, standards, and the procedure. Again, to emphasize, DLP is increasingly gaining traction. It's a very interesting and challenging field to be in. You get to work on the rules that would trigger off the alerts, set thresholds for them, test it out in your environment. So an effective DLP program, it contains 3 components. First, discovery and classification, monitoring, and enforcement. Discovery and classification, it maps the data in the cloud storage services and databases and enables the classification based on data categories, such as your regulated data, credit card data, public data, PII, etc. Monitoring, this has to be done for both the ingress and egress-based traffic, which is the incoming as well as the outgoing traffic. Effective DLP strategies monitor the usage of data across locations and platforms. The ability to monitor the data can be executed on gateways, servers, and storage, as well as workstations and endpoint devices. Enforcement, many DLP tools provide the capability to interrogate data and compare its location, use a transmission destination against a set of policies to prevent the data loss. So if a policy violation is detected, specified relevant enforcement actions can automatically be performed. Enforcement options can include the ability to alert, block the data, transfer, or reroute them for additional validation, or even encrypt the data prior to leaving the organization boundaries. Now, when implementing these restrictions or controls to block or quarantine the data item, it's essential to create a balance so that it does not hinder the business from doing its legitimate transactions or the genuine activities. So that's actually one of the challenges associated with being in a DLP role. There has to be a balance that has to be maintained between the two. Also, an effective DLP solution should look at all effective ways the data loss can occur. So this includes your printers, your boards, your Bluetooths, someone opening up the Gmail or Dropbox and uploading the contents into them. So typically your DLP policies or your DLP rules that you set for them, they should be addressing these at the minimum. A typical DLP policy should at least address what kind of data is permitted to be stored in the cloud, where can the data be stored, under which jurisdictions, how should it be stored, like the encryption as well as the storage access considerations, what kind of data access is permitted, and with which devices and what networks, and which applications as well as which tunnel. Under what conditions is data allowed to leave the cloud? Now, talking about encryption technologies that we can leverage in the cloud to protect the data. There is data, for the data in motion, we can leverage IPsec, VPN, or the TLS. And for the data at rest, based on the design of software, a single file can be encrypted, a partition can be encrypted, a folder can be encrypted, or an entire drive can be encrypted. Again, the encryption mechanism may vary in the manner in which it's deployed and dependent on the time frame. Key management, that's an interesting component with regards to the encryption implementations. Access to your keys, key storage, backup, and replication of the keys should be taken into considerations. And then throughout the life cycle, cryptographic keys should never be transmitted in the clear. They should always remain in a trusted environment. Masking, obfuscation, anonymization, and tokenizations. Again, the ability to use encryption is not always a realistic option for various reasons, including performance, costs, and technical abilities. As a result, additional mechanisms need to be employed to ensure that data confidentiality can be achieved. Data masking or data obfuscation is the process of hiding, replacing, or omitting sensitive information from a specific data set, especially PII, Anonymization, that's the process of removing the indirect identifiers to prevent the data analysis tools from pulling data from multiple resources to identify individual or sensitive information. Tokenization, that's the process of substituting a sensitive data element with a non-sensitive equivalent, referred to as the token. Now, the token is usually a collection of the random values with the shape and form of the original data placeholder and mapped back to the original data by the tokenization application or the solution. Now, moving to some of the best practices in the cloud environment, the cloud provider should ensure that all the devices in the data center are secure. There is hardening mechanisms followed. All the guest accounts are removed, all the unused ports are closed. There's no default passwords that remain, and then there is a strong password policy in effect. Any admin accounts are significantly secured as well as logged. Again, logging and monitoring is a huge thing amongst the organization. All unnecessary services are disabled. The physical access is severely limited and controlled, and the systems are patched, maintained, and updated according to the vendor guidance. Looking at some of the best practices from the print your own device or the PYOD's perspective, cloud customers should ensure that all assets in the PYOD infrastructure have access to the sensitive data in the cloud should at least have the remote wipe or the remote lock capability in the event of a loss or theft, with the user granting written permission to the organization to wipe lock via assigned authorized use policy. It should be protected with some form of anti-malware or the security software. They should utilize some form of the local encryption as well. It should be secured with strong access controls, example, a password or a biometric in a multi-factor configuration. They have and properly employ the VPN solutions for the cloud access, and they have some sort of data loss, leak prevention, and TLB solution installed. Now, the organization may also want to consider containerization software options for the personally owned user devices as a means to isolate their personal data from the organization's information. Layered defenses or defense in depth, as we talked about earlier, that's the practice of having multiple overlapping means of securing the environment with a variety of methods. Again, then this should include a blend of your administrative, logical, technical, as well as the physical controls. Also to mention, it's not only the physical devices that need to be hardened. We have to think of the virtual devices or the virtual instances in the same manner if we would consider the physical counterparts, because cloud computing relies so heavily on virtualizations for load balancing and scalability. It's important to remember that virtual instances will require stronger protection as well. Now, one of the things associated with storing data in the cloud is for how long the data needs to be retained in the cloud. So the data retention policy should include the following. The retention period, which is how long the data should be kept by the organization. And then this usually refers to data that is being archived for long-term storage, that is data not currently being used in the production environment. Applicable regulation, the retention policy should refer to all applicable regulatory guidance. And in cases where there is conflicting regulation, the policy should then highlight any such disparity and include the senior management's decision for how to approach and resolve this conflict with the policy as an appropriate mechanism. Retention format, the policy should contain a description of how the data is actually archived, that is, what type of media is stored on, and handling specifications particular to the data. Data classification, the organization should have an overarching data classification policy that serves as guidance for data creators as well as the owners, describing how and when data should be classified and security procedures and controls for handling the various classifications. Archiving and retrieval procedures, the policy should include a detailed description of the processes both for sending the data into the storage and for recovering it. Monitoring, maintenance, and enforcement. So as with all the policies, the policy should list in detail how often the policy will be reviewed and amended, by whom, the consequences for failure to adhere to the policy, and which entity within the organization is responsible for enforcement. Also, I would like to touch upon the options for the data destruction in the cloud. Now, Since everything is hosted on virtual machine, the physical destruction of the media is not applicable. So that leaves crypto shredding as the sole pragmatic option for data disposal in the cloud. Crypto shredding involves encrypting the data with a strong encryption engine and then taking the keys generated in that process, encrypting them with a different encryption engine, and then destroying the keys. Again, as with the other data management functions, the organization needs to create a policy for the data disposal. And then this policy should include detailed descriptions of the following: the process for the data disposal, the applicable regulations, as well as clear direction of when the data should be destroyed. Moving over to data privacy in the cloud. Again, privacy is most commonly associated with the confidentiality of personally identifiable information. The data security best practices we talked about earlier, they gel with achieving the data privacy in the cloud. So typical questions to be taken into considerations are: what information in the cloud is regulated under the data protection laws? Who is responsible for personal data in the cloud? Whose laws apply in a dispute? Where is the personal data processed? The privacy, who is responsible for handling the privacy breaches? And then who is responsible for protecting the privacy? Looking at some of the best practices to achieve the data privacy, and yes, we discussed quite a few of them while discussing the user access management as well as DLP before. So there has to be a segregation of the roles and responsibilities, as well as responsibilities. There should be proper training and instructions in place. The authentication techniques and procedures, as well as the authorization techniques, they need to be properly enforced and implemented. There should be control on the time validity of the assigned authorizations profiles. There should be a plan in place for the personal data breach handling. There should be techniques and procedures as well. We should log activities according to the criticality of the personal data or the purpose of processing. And then there should be a data retention control according to the purpose of the processing as well. Now, several factors that determine that which data privacy laws applies and then who oversees them. So, I mean, like some of the, again, this thing is not exhaustive. Some of the factors that might actually be looked upon to decide like who decides the data privacy laws is the nature of the organization handling the personal information. If it's a federal government institution or if it's a provincial institution. Is it a private sector or is it engaged in the commercial activities? Is it a federally regulated business? And then where is the organization based? Now, as a cybersecurity professional, it's important to have the knowledge about the different data privacy laws as well as the regulations as well. For instance, like your HIPAA, which deals with the health information, your GLPA, which deals with the financial services sector, your COPA, which is information related to the children under the age of 30, your PIPEDA, which deals with PII of the Canadian residents, and then there's PCI TSS, which deals with the credit and the debit card records. So it's quite important that as a cybersecurity professional, we do have a knowledge of the data privacy laws as well as the regulations as well. Now, moving to some of the risks associated with the cloud computing. These risks can be broadly classified into 6 main categories that include the policy and the organization risk, the data security and the regulatory, technology risks, operational risks, vendor risk, as well as financial risks. So, policy and organization risks, they are related to the choices that the cloud service consumer makes about the cloud service providers. To some extent, they are the natural consequence of outsourcing your IT services outside the IT industry. They are also often called the third-party risks. Data security and regulatory risks, which can be from the data leakage from malicious insider, unauthorized data access by the service provider, lack of flexibility for the encryption, data control, lack of visibility into cloud operations and the ability to monitor for the compliance. Technology risks, they can be a limitation on the customizations of the service offerings. There could be compatibility issues with the other cloud providers. or they could be evolving technologies that could require re-architecture or the retraining. Operational risks that cover your lack of service level customizations, so control over the application availability and as well as your disaster recovery plans, etc. Vendor risks, they pertain to association and reliance on a service provider. Now they can be, for instance, it could be like a provider lock-in, which refers to the situation in which the consumer has made significant vendor-specific investments, and then these investments can lead to high costs of switching between the providers. Provider exit, in this situation, the provider is no longer willing or capable of providing the required service, and then this could be triggered by the bankruptcy or a need to restructure the business. Supply chain risk. Now, several parties may be involved in delivering your cloud service, like that includes your cloud couriers, your platform providers, your application providers. So there are risks associated with all the different entities involved in your supply chain, and then this should be handled carefully. The SolarWinds supply chain attack, that's one of the most potentially damaging that we have seen in recent memory. So in this breach, the attackers, they were able to add the malicious code into the company's software systems. The code created a backdoor to customers' information technology systems, which the hackers then used to install even more malware that helped them spy on companies and organizations. So by comprising just one vendor, the attackers were able to get access to all the vendors' customers. Financial risks. These risks, they pertain to underestimating the initial costs and in some cases continuing to carry the capital expenditures of the hardware as well as softwares. There may be a case of contract modification or the cancellation fees or additional overhead of managing the service providers. So again, yeah, this was just a broad classification of the risks into 6 main categories, and then moving forward to the management of these cloud computing risks. So there's essentially 4 steps to it, and this is what your CRISC certification covers and very broadly. There's risk identifications. So that's a process that aims to identify all the risk events in the project. It's an integral part for the risk management lifecycle. So to identify the risk, it means that you are evaluating your IT assets. You are determining the threats the IT assets are subject to. Identify the vulnerabilities associated with these assets, and then you map and document security controls in place at the moment. Risk assessment and analysis. So you analyze and evaluate the IT risk to determine the likelihood and impact on business objectives. Again, as someone who is tightly engaged in risk assessment in a day-to-day role, like to assess the risk, that's a very, very daunting and a very challenging task, but it's a very interesting thing to be in as well. You understand the data flow diagrams, you understand the whole initiative from the beginning to the scratch, you understand the use cases, you understand the architecture diagrams, the risks to the data or the threats to the data that we spoke about earlier. You estimate if there are controls in place, you understand if there are controls in place to protect that, if there's encryption levels for the data flow that's applicable, there's data retention requirements. You also talk about the identity as well as access management controls, the logging and the monitoring standards, the disaster recovery plans, the application security. So there is a whole dimension, whole lot of things that you need to understand when you are actually doing a risk assessment. And it's a very great field to be in, because anything that goes into production that needs to have a risk assessment done, and yes, you do need to understand it very, very thoroughly. So moving on to the risk mitigation or the risk response. So that's like developing and implementing the risk responses and applying the various controls that can be used to mitigate the business exposure. Again, it can be classified into 4 types. Risk assessment, acceptance. That's to knowingly acknowledge and accept the risk and taking no action to reduce the risk. Risk mitigation, so it's the decision to mitigate or reduce the risk through the implementation of the new controls or the improvement of the existing controls. Again, the controls can vary on based on the managerial controls, which is your policy and practices, your technical controls, which is your firewall, physical controls, which is your locks, so the screen filters, and then the compensating controls. Risk avoidance, this applies when the risk is too large to accept and there are no cost-effective controls available. So the decision by the management to cease the risk-related activity, like it's just like closing down an office in a hazardous region, or to replace the old equipment that is likely to fail, or to stop the production of an unsafe product. Risk sharing transfer, the reduction of overall is the reduction of the overall risk to the organization by diluting, sharing, transferring the risk to the other party. So that typically includes your insurance as well as the joint ventures. Risk control and reporting. So that's required to continuously monitor the IT risk and controls in place to constantly evaluate the effectiveness of the risk management strategy. It also covers reporting to the stakeholders. Now, questions evolve around the value of the metrics, monitoring and analyzing the key risk indicators as well as your key performance indicators that can be used to identify changes or trends related to the efficiency and effectiveness of the controls. Now, knowledge of risk and compliance reporting requirements, monitoring tools, and techniques of the trade help the organizations make cost-effective decisions to protect their digital assets. Again, to end this, like on a closing note, to end the session, it's important to understand and analyze each of the security threats as well as the security vulnerabilities, because only then you are able to essentially manage the risk and apply the appropriate controls. Having the knowledge is very crucial to essentially managing the risk. Okay. Again, there is like plenty of certifications definitely to help you out, and we do have CertificationStation for that. Okay, so I do see there's quite a few questions in the stage chit chat channel, so we can take the questions from here at this point.
First, I just want to say good job. Very important session. I enjoyed it thoroughly. It was very well done, so I appreciate you taking the time to talk to everybody here. So just want to say good job and thank you for spending your day doing this for us. I guess I will just read all questions and see how it goes from there. All right, so first question. Could you please explain if homomorphic encryption is still a concept or how much progress has it been made in this field?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? There was a little, sorry, yeah.
Sure. Homomorphic encryption, is it still a concept related to the cloud, and how much progress has it been made in the field?
Okay, so based on my experience with the organizations, I haven't seen the utilizing the homomorphic encryption to much extent at this point. But then, yeah, I've just had the experience of like 7 years, so it won't be fair on my part to generalize it just based on the experience that I have. But again, if anyone else wants to comment on that, of anyone else, yes, from the people who are up in the stage, yeah, please feel free to do that.
Yeah, I just know that it's essentially you're encrypting data in use. It's pretty complicated. I know it's used in cloud environments. I just don't know, where the technology is at this juncture. But I would assume within the next several years you're gonna start having. I know IBM's working on something, probably some other companies that are doing it as well. But I think it's still sort of a new technology. So I mean, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I agree to that, because yes, I haven't seen much application of this, to be honest, on my part. But yes, who knows? Obviously, as you just stated, in future there might be an evolving And we see the utilization of this encryption much more.
Right.
So, good question. Yeah.
All right. Next one. If you just expand a little bit on crypto shredding, how it works. The question was if crypto shredding can be elaborated. So, because the person had a different understanding before the session, so they just want to maybe, just wondering if you could maybe elaborate on how crypto shredding works.
Oh, yeah, thanks for the question. So crypto shredding is now in the cloud. Since we are dealing with the virtual machines, it's impossible to ensure the physical destruction of the media. Hence, we are left with the only option of crypto shredding. Now, what's crypto shredding? That's the practice of deleting the data by deliberately deleting or overwriting the encryption keys. So that requires the data, then this requires that the data has been encrypted. And for instance, we encrypt the data and then we encrypt the keys further or destroy the keys so that the data cannot be encrypted, cannot be decrypted further. So this essentially ensures that the data is safe, because it's encrypted and then there's no means to recover that data. That's what crypto shredding is all about. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's pretty much, it's essentially the practice. It's just, destroying the key that you're using for the encryption, so it can't be decrypted. Yeah, that's perfect. Next one. Read this for a second. Okay, so how can we verify the cloud vendor complies with customer InfoSec or privacy policy requirements? For instance, privacy regulation, GDPR provides rights to data subjects to get their data deleted. So how, as a customer, can I verify that my cloud vendor has actually deleted the personal data from all servers?
Great question. So to answer to the first part, there is this privacy level agreements in place, and then that has to be thought about before you are actually leveraging the cloud services, especially if your data is hosted in the other jurisdictions as well. There's contracts in place, there is agreements in place that ensure that, and then there are policies in place that are put before and well thought of before you actually leverage any of the cloud services. If your data needs to be deleted and if it's being hosted, if it's in a conflict with the jurisdiction at which your data is getting hosted, the senior management's decision is the best approach to handle. Again, these are the discussions that are done before you actually leverage any of the cloud services or before you actually think of moving the data to any jurisdiction that's outside your local own jurisdiction. That answers it. And yes, please feel free, anyone from the state channel, to add to it if there's further insights on this.
So I would also probably just add that I think when you sign up for a service, you're agreeing to their terms. So you should make sure you're reading your policy related to the service that you're getting. So like even if you're just a customer, you want to use Gmail. You're not actually a company, just as a regular person, you want to use Gmail, there's going to be terms that you have to agree to. So if they're saying they're taking your data and they're selling it, they have to comply with regulations, for example, GDPR, but you want to make sure that, that is specified in there. I don't know the ins and outs of, different regulations in different countries, but I would, make sure you're reading whatever you're signing up for. I know nobody likes to read that stuff. I just click next and hope for the best, but it's probably a good practice to just kind of skim through and just see if there's anything that you don't like, because if it's free, you're the product, right, essentially.
So can I add just something to it? So before, as Miles said, before you even go to a cloud, very much read about what is the laws which applies to your data, and then like your legal should be very much involved from day one in this, and then talk to the cloud providers in terms of when you negotiate your contracts. So you can also stipulate that very clearly that this is how our data should be handled. Then the last part, when you actually implement it, that is where you be very diligent on how your implementation is, like from storage, from key vaults, from anything which you are going to use. make sure you are following those same lines which you had initial discussions. So nobody, because cloud can say we are ISO, we are GDPR compliant. That's one way to say that they can follow. But ultimately, it's the customer, the responsibilities lies in. So keep all those in mind, because this is not as simple as to say, yes, AWS or Azure or Google says that we are compliant, and they're going to take care for me for all the PCI, PII. They're compliant, but ultimately you are responsible for how your data is being placed or where you're placing it.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, very, very good point.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Excellent point. Yeah.
Let's see here. Another one. So who's responsible for backup in the cloud? An additional. Well, so let's start with that one, and then I'll add the second question. That way, it's easier to manage. So who is responsible for backup in the cloud?
Well, it's ultimately the organization who's leveraging the cloud services. They should ensure that, yes, the data is being backed up in the cloud, and then who particularly has access to the data. Again, the things that we talked about the data retention, as well as the format in which the data needs to be backed up, or the long-term storage for it. That's ultimately on the organization itself. And then again, the contracts and everything, that those list down essentially how the data is being backed up and who often has access to the data. But it's on the organization. It's ultimately on the organization. If to answer to your question over there.
If an authority is required to take a bit level image for legal purposes, how does this approach? Okay, hold on. So if during forensics, if an authority is required to take a bit-to-bit level image in cloud data for legal purposes, how does this approach work? The question's a little.
Yeah, I understand. So, so let me take a stab at this. In additional authority required to take bit-to-bit level image cloud data for, I think there is a little grammar issue over there. First things first, deja vu. But yes, during forensics purpose. So again, you have to. I mean, when you are moving data to the cloud, the first things is you should be having an effective incident response plans as well as the forensic procedures for this. As an organization, you are ultimately accountable for retrieving and for maintaining any of the forensics evidence. So additional authority as from the organization, again, it depends on the criticality of your businesses, because if it's you need to get evidence, you need to preserve the evidence, it's ultimately on you, and you should make sure that the cloud service provider has those mechanisms in place so as to provide you those evidences and without any delays. Hope that answers the question.
Can I add something to it? So when you're talking about forensics and bit level image capture for any legal hold or something, keep in mind that these both applies differently to what kind of service you are talking about. If it's a PaaS-based service, maybe a managed key vault, managed storage, that's a different one. They cannot give you a bit level copy because it's a shared resource. But if you are saying that I had a VM which I want to get bit level image, you have that authority to strip that virtual hard drive and do as you please, because that is within your control. And if you want to go further beyond that to say, I would like to have a subpoena or something, then guess what? That's where the law authorities and where the jurisdiction lies, all those things come in. It's not very black and white in the cloud, to say, because you are not in full control of your assets. So you cannot just say, I need a bit encryption, and the cloud provider is going to say, yes, here it is, because it has to say the same way you are asking for a privilege which is way too high. It also has to protect the privileges for the other clients and privacy as well. So the question is, like for cloud, definitely the methods are different. You cannot apply the same methods which you apply on-prem or the assets which are in control.
Well said. I had a thought and I forgot what it was. Oh yeah, and these are the risks that you need to be willing to accept. So if you were to, if you want to go to a cloud environment, that's something that you would need to obviously do your due diligence to make sure that you understand that risk. So that's super important.
Right.
In cloud models, especially for software as a service, who's accountable for data breaches?
Great question. Again, I would like to emphasize that ultimately the organization who's ultimately accountable for any of the data breaches, and they got to do the reporting. Polymath, please feel free to answer here in a more knowledgeable manner. So,
Yeah, sure. So from a software as a service, so keep in mind you are renting a service. But again, as Mike said, data is you are the custodian of the data. And when I say you are the custodian, even though you're not managing how it is being accessed, but you're still controlling it. Case in point, Office 365, let's say that there is a compromise. And at that point, the things which gets compromised is not the storage, or if the backend gets compromised. So there are two cases for it. Can be a case there is a backend, like something from your cloud service provider happen, and that. So there is a different way of handling it. There would be a very detailed from your cloud service provider versus you, but ultimately you would be responsible, because guess what? Whose name would going to come in the front of the paper or the news? X and X organization got hacked or breached. The second part is, let's say that one of your users' IDs gets compromised or admins gets compromised. At that point of time, or the provider was only the interface. It's your ID. You basically handed over the keys to someone, or due to some other reason. Either it gets scammed, phished, which breached, hacked, whatever you say. So customer is ultimately liable for data. The methods for RBAC is also very important in software as a service. So you have to think it through, that where is your control and where is this cloud provider control, and the data is, it's always you, doesn't matter which IaaS, PaaS, SaaS you go to, data is still yours to handle, yours to manage, and you ultimately the customer is responsible for it.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Polymath. Appreciate it. Hope that answers the questions. Very well explained.
Next one is, what is your thought about policy as code in cloud? I know there are so many vendors. How effective are those? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so yes, like with policy as a code, essentially, I haven't seen much applications of this in my prior experiences with the organizations, but I know it's meant to leverage the software engineering practices such as your version controls, etc. So it's definitely a good approach and a good thing to do, in my opinion. Again, I can just speak on what I know, but yes, I haven't seen any of the organizations practically leveraging policy as a code.
So I can add to it because we are doing it. So policy and code, there are different ways you can talk about it. Are you talking about the governance policy versus your software development code policies? So if you're, for your governance policies, you can actually dictate all those policies beforehand based on how your layouts are. What services, what regions, where should the access be? That's one part that you can always apply as a template, as a overall umbrella. The second portion comes in is when your developers are coding it. Are you going to, so I'm just going to code something which we have used before, so SonarQube, which basically does the code scanning as your developer submit the check-in, check-out. So before a master gets in, that has the policies which has been defined, which goes through the code and parses it to say, do I see, like, and it can be from OWASP 3.2 to anything which is custom to your org. So you can do that, and based on how well-versed your processes are from a dev and app perspective, it can be very well integrated, and that helps a lot. Because at the end, when the code comes out and checks in and gets released, guess what? The vulnerability scan, so those does not show up, any of those which normally shows up red when your red team does say, can I see what I can do in this? So yes, policy and code is a good idea, but then it has to be matured enough that you understand how you are implementing, and your developers or the people who are controlling that code should be very well educated on, at least on the OWASP perspective, so they understand they have the best practices for coding.
Thank you, Polymer. Again, I appreciate it. Very well explained.
So a couple more. And Miles, if you have prior engagements and stuff, obviously let me know and I could cut it short. Just let me know if you're out of time. The questions keep coming in, so I'm going to just keep asking them until you tell me not to.
Okay, yeah, sure. We can take up a couple more questions and sure, yeah.
Okay. So this one's a little tricky. I don't know if I could even answer, but what artifacts from Cloud Security Alliance is useful for application teams to build secure software? If you can mention any key guideline document references.
Yes, great question. Okay, so on top of my head, I do know that there is like three of this. There is the CSA guide, there is a CCM matrix, and then there is NSA. The CCM matrix that does list down the security controls, and with regards to the application controls, yes, it's let me revisit that, and I will get back to you forever, and I will put the response down here in this chat itself, or maybe as well like DM you. But yeah, I need to revisit that in order to give you, if you're looking for specific key guidelines, document references.
Okay, good. So CDN clients such as Netflix store U.S. copyrighted movies on a U.S. DC. So someone on a VPN from Australia can access these movies. So how does the security apply on CDN access through different regions through copyrighted data?
Okay, yeah, if you, thanks Deja for this question. So if you paid attention in the session, yes, it's essentially related to how the policies are enforced at the first step itself. So again, it's decided beforehand, irrespective of which model or which deployment session that you are leveraging. Hope that answers it.
Is there a framework or standard for managing cloud services?
Yes, there's actually quite a few of them. NIST has got a lot of documents and a lot of references guide to study on them. So yes, there is a huge amount of them. Polymath, do you want to add something specific to this?
I think from a cloud service provider, as you said, I think those are the perfect ones from CSA, NISA, and NISC, all of those practices or frameworks. And I think that should give you enough to get started with. And it's a custom, right? So the best part of the cloud is you pick and choose what kind of services you want and how much you want to get into it, and how much control you want to give in versus how much control you want to take in. So definitely those are the only things I would suggest to start with.
Great, thanks, Polymath.
Slushes is typing, but he's been typing for about 25 minutes, so I don't know what he's asking here, if anything.
Okay, so
it's like my grandma with like one finger, you know. I'll give it like one more minute. Oh, here we go. Have you ever participated in enacting DRP measures? If so, when was you first, and what were some lessons learned?
Oh, I so wish this term DRP was reworded to DLP, and I would have been able to answer that, because yes, DLP stands as one of my specializations.
So you can answer, I mean, if you want to answer through DLP, I mean, if that's your, you know.
Yes, that's right. So for the DLP, I would say it's a recursive process, because you got to know, well, first and foremost things is striking the balance. You don't want to hinder the business, but as well as you want to you want to trigger your alerts when sensitive data is actually leaving your organization. So there has to be a balance maintained between the two. In terms of the lessons learned, I would say data classification forms the most foundational ground for your DLP policies, because if you have effectively classified your data, if you know the disclaimers, if you know the keywords, if you know the regex to put into place so that you can build your DLP alerts and rules on, then nothing like that. And then add to it, you also follow the thresholds. For instance, if there's a threshold of like 10 PII, that should be blocked, quarantined, or etc. The second challenge to the DLP is covering all the possible endpoints, or covering all the possible ways in which a data loss can occur. Again, that's like your Pluto, your Cloud, your Dropbox, Gmail. So an effective DLP policy should be able to monitor all those things. We have had cases in the past where we have known that, okay, that was employee is already gone and he took a whole bunch of documents with himself. So real-time monitoring is another aspect to DLP. You should be monitoring the data in the real time. Because once the damage has been done, then it's hard for you to go back to your other like corporate security or the employee relations team so that they can reach out to your exit for the former employee and then get the data deleted and get the confirmation from them. So essentially, DLP, it's a very interesting and challenging field. You get to play a lot around with your rules, fine-tuning, false positives, regex, covering the whole plethora of possible data loss sources. It's a great thing. Hope that answers the question. Well, I'm sorry it was on the DRP, but okay, I see it's.
I think that's it for the questions. Just want to say, thank you again for doing this session. Sure, I'm not the only one that enjoyed it, so thank you for taking the time to do this for us. Want to make one quick announcement. Starting this Tuesday, don't forget, we have the CCSP Bootcamp. So anyone that's interested or going to take the CCSP, Adam Gordon will be doing another bootcamp for free. You have to be a member of the server to join. I'm going to post the link probably on Monday. I don't have it yet, so that's why I have not made an announcement. But for all of you that took the time to join the session, you get free insight into the workings of how stuff operates. So again, this Tuesday, might be Wednesday for some of you, or it might be Monday for some of you, but it's June 15th Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. June 15th is the CCSP Bootcamp. So just let me know. I think that's it from everybody. Oh wait, is there another question? Nope, that's it. So thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm overwhelmed by the amazing quality of the questions. And yes, thank you. I appreciate the people who were my co-workers, especially people moderating this session so effectively, making sure that there were no hiccups. I appreciate all of your efforts as well from my team. Thank you so much.